Testing. 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank Judy Comiskey for that lovely prelude music. Welcome to all of you here and also all of you that are watching from home. Boy, we're getting special treatment from Lloyd and Lily. They are Floyd and Lily, sorry, especially with the coffee on the table today. Thanks a lot. Well, how many of you are watching the Olympics or following that? Okay, a little bit. That's kind of like me. I think I've only seen a couple of hours of that. Today's the last day of the Olympics, and Norway, I think I mentioned 2 weeks ago that Norway has won more medals than any other country, and they continue to perform well. I think they broke a record for winning the most amounts of gold medals in any Olympic to date. So right now, Norway has a total of 35 medals, including gold. ROC, which I thought stood for Republic of China. It doesn't. It stands for the Russian Olympic Committee. Anyways, they're in second place. Peter says that it's the cheating committee, but and Germany's in third place, and then Canada's in fourth place, and the United States is in fifth place. But anyways, I've not been following it that much, but those athletes are really awesome what they're doing, and I realized this past some of the events that I was watching, those what is it called, a half pipe type thing. Well, there are some places where they can practice where there's soft, cushiony, giant mattresses, so that when they learn their tricks, they don't get hurt. And then the athletes that can practice at those facilities have a definite advantage. All right, please join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we just give you praise this morning and thank you for your love and mercy that never fails. Father, thank you for revealing yourself through your word, and we pray that you would open our hearts, open our ears and our hearts as Karl brings his message this morning. And also, Father, thank you for the strong sermon this morning from Jonathan, and the reminder that we are most powerful in you when we humble ourselves and give ourselves for others. So we just thank you so much that we can gather, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, now we're going to have some music from Mary and Georgine.
When I worked for John Van Diest at Multnomah Press, he had convinced pretty early in my time there, Chuck Swindoll you need to write a book, and he did, and then he wrote a whole bunch of others. But I ordered this hymnal because Willie said it's what everyone uses here that does the music, and it's got a foreword by Chuck Swindoll. I just want to read the first paragraph because I love what he says. I love to sing. Of greater importance, I love to sing with others. Help me hold this, Mary. I can think of no more glorious sound than a body of people who love their Lord, singing and making melody in their hearts. Whether the voices are blending together in harmonious a cappella or accompanied by a grand pipe organ or even a full orchestra, there is no sound on earth more heavenly than the sound of singing saints. So let's sing together, really sing it out.
Come, thou fount of every blessing, to my heart to sing thy praise. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise his name, I'm fixed upon it, name of God's redeeming love. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor, daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. Beyond the sunset, oh blissful morning, when with our Savior heaven is begun, earth's toiling ended, oh glorious dawning, beyond the sunset, when day is done. Beyond the sunset, no clouds will gather, nor storms will threaten, no fears annoy. O day of gladness, O day unending, beyond the sunset, eternal joy. Beyond the sunset, his hand will guide me to God the Father, whom I adore. His glorious presence with words of welcome will be my portion on that fair shore. Is that it? No. Beyond the sunset, oh glad reunion with our dear loved ones who've gone before. In that fair homeland, we'll know no parting, beyond the sunset, forevermore.
Yeah, thank you for that. So just a few announcements. First of all, Karl's newsletter, Carl's new newsletter is on the back table, so you'll want to be sure and pick one up as you leave this morning. Also, there's a lot of birthdays this week, and one that snuck by us, I believe, is Diane Venable, whose birthday was, when was your birthday? Friday. Okay, we just missed that one. Many of you know Jim Hewlett. His birthday is today. And I understand he's on his way, or maybe he's already in Texas, but he's hunting hogs down there. And maybe they'll bring some meat for the hunters' banquet, sportsman's banquet. And that's where Willie is also. Rod Foydell, is he here? There's Rod. His birthday is tomorrow. And Claire Holstead, her birthday is tomorrow. And a couple that we don't want to miss, so you might want to send a card if you know these folks. Let's see, Donna Johnson? Sorry. Well, her birthday was going to be on Thursday. Okay. I should have checked on that ahead of time. And then also Chris Anderson, he's here. His birthday is next Saturday. So what I do is I check the directory and see what's coming up, and her name was on there. Her name was on there. So hopefully all of you are listed in Alan's directory that he's pulling together. So do we have any first-time visitors today? What's his first name? Spike. Okay, Spike. I like your name. All righty. Happy birthday. Okay, I think that's it for birthdays. When you're retired, a lot of times you lose sight on federal holidays. But tomorrow is President's Day, and Marion's always saying, well, "Don't you know it's coming up?" Because it's always, the third Monday or something like that of the month. But so tomorrow's President's Day, so we're not going to get mail, things like that. But to kind of wake us up for this morning, so we'll be wide awake for Karl when he teaches us. I thought it'd be good to just have a few trivia questions on President's Day. The first two are easy. I think somebody's going to get these, and the last one is harder. Okay. So the first one, and just shout it out if you know what the answer is. Who was the only president to serve in both World War I and World War II? Come on, think. Eisenhower. Who said that first? All right, way to go. Eisenhower. Which president never lived in the White House, nor did he ever represent a political party? George Washington. Okay. Now this is a hard one. Which president was also a licensed bartender? Nice try. Teddy Roosevelt, nope. One more guess. Yeah, well, Abe Lincoln was also a bartender. I guess he had a partner, and they opened up a tavern. And that was when he was, younger, and it was, anyways, you'll have to read about Abraham Lincoln. He's a really interesting guy. But yeah, so now you know something more about Abraham Lincoln. All right, I'm gonna just tell you what Alan and I did on Wednesday. So if we can have that photo, there he is. I thought you might want to see pictures from our hike on Wednesday. Sometimes when it's kind of rainy and wet over here, we travel to the east side, just over to Hood River, and you can see how nice and sunny it was, and you can see Mount Hood in the background. A beautiful, beautiful day, and what took it over the top for me was after we hiked. Go ahead and show the other one. After we hiked, we went to a little hole-in-the-wall Mexican restaurant called El Rincon, and we had some authentic tamales, beans and rice, and Alan loved it. He said, I'm going to ruin my dinner, but he ate it all, and it was great. So don't you think Alan is thriving after his accident? Oh yeah, let me tell you where this is at. So when you go past Hood River, about 3 miles, if you look over on the Washington side, you'll see an escarpment going up. And anyways, that's it right there. It's called Coyote Wall. And those are not crutches. But I wanted to also point out that in about 2 months, that whole east side area is going to be just blooming with wildflowers. And there's places where everybody can go and park and look up on the hillside and see all of the beautiful creation that God has put here for us. And then you can go to El Rincon and have some tamales after that. So you go across the Hood River Bridge, you turn right, and you go past, what's that little town? No. Bingen. Then there's a little town beyond Bingen. No, it's not the Bridge of the Gods. It's the Hood River Bridge. You turn right and go about 5 miles. Oh, I thought you all wanted to know about hiking. You want to know about the restaurant. Okay. The restaurant is called El Rincon. And when you go to Hood River, you go to Main Street, where you got to be careful not to run over tourists. You turn right, and you go about 1 mile, and you'll see it on the left-hand side. It's kind of a hole in the wall, but the food is really good, burritos and different things. And I'm getting paid to advertise them. Well, okay. Let me just get off of El Rincon now. All right. Hey, but I did notice, I was looking at the site, and right next door is a cannabis place. And I said, oh, no. That's not what we were there for. Okay, so let me, I'm getting into trouble, so let me move on. All right. Oh, just let me mention that in 3 weeks after Karl's series is done, we're going to start a new series, and it'll be taught by Dr. James DeYoung. He's an author, and he's also the senior professor at Western Seminary, and he'll be teaching a 6-week series on prophecy. So hopefully you'll come and listen to that and tell your friends about that. It should be pretty good. All right, Karl. Now now is number 3 of 5.
Number 3 of 5.
All righty.
So, my first question is, Alan, do you do anything different now that you hike? Do you hike differently?
I keep my eyes open. I look at the trail.
Okay, so he's looking at the trail. Good. And then the second question is, what is an escarpment?
An escarpment is when the landscape just rises up, and there's like a cliff.
Okay. All right, so an escarpment is when the land rises up and you have a cliff. Alan keeps his eyes on the path so he doesn't fall off the escarpment. And then Dr. DeYoung was my Greek professor when I was at Western. So I highly encourage you attending what he's doing on prophecy. I think it'll be great. Well, we are in chapter, what chapter are we on? We're in chapter 2, I know, just playing with you. Okay, also you guys get the award for sitting at this table. This table is normally empty. I think people are waiting for Jesus to arrive, and somehow he gets that table of honor. But so thank you guys for sitting there. It's nice to know that it's because you're not afraid of me. Well, I want to begin by looking, because one of the things we've been looking at with the book of Ruth is just this collision between God's providence and human action, right? We just see that, and you'll see that throughout the book. And so I want to just share a story about how Gwen and I met, because it was definitely a collision between the providence of God and human action. And so both of us are members of Campus Crusade for Christ, now known as Cru. And one of the things we have the privilege of doing is raising our support. So my boss will commonly say, Carl, you did such a good job, I'm going to give you a raise, which means, Carl, you can go out and raise some more money if you want. So the issue here, though, is Gwen's support came in really slowly, to her chagrin, right? Because that meant she got delayed being able to go back to China. And so in her heart, she was really sad, right? Because you want that to come in quickly and you can get doing the things that you want to do. But God had delayed her support coming in. And on my side, the support came in really fast. And so what that did is it put us at the same place at the same time. And so definitely providential. And Gwen was working really hard. I was working really hard. Hers just got delayed. Mine got accelerated, and we met. Then when we met, I knew that Gwen was not the right person for me. I just knew that. And within 3 weeks, the Spirit of God said, boy, you're the biggest fool in this whole training. And I realized she was the right girl for me. And so then I was ready to tell her that she was the right girl for me. But there was a complication, that the providence of God made me delay it until the very end of the training. And so what we see there, though, and I could share many more providential elements there, but is that God brought us together at the right time, at the right place, which is Bakersfield, California. If you know Bakersfield, I mean, it's just a farming town. You get histoplasmosis from Bakersfield, and I grew up in California. We called it the armpit of California. So if you are from Bakersfield, my apologies to you, not for me insulting you. But, so God brought us together, and it was both human action, because Gwen was working hard, I was working hard. And then when we got together, it was definitely his providence that brought us together. And we're going to see that throughout the book of Ruth. And so what I want us to do is just remember what the big idea here is, that the sovereign God works through ordinary people living ordinary lives. And that's every one of us in this room. To do what? Extraordinary things. And that's the part that we have to believe, right? I mean, it's not hard to believe you're ordinary or I'm ordinary. It's not hard to believe that as we go about our daily activities that they're rather routine. But the reality is God will use those to do extraordinary things. And we see that very clearly in the book of Ruth. But there is a hitch. And what's the hitch? That we need to be what? Devoted to him. And as we're devoted to him, he will then use those things to do extraordinary things. And we see that with Ruth. And so when we think through the book of Ruth, we have this chart. And with this chart, we want to begin to think through, we're now in chapter 2, and that what's going to happen in this part of the story is we're going to begin to see that we're introduced to a new person. And who's the new person we're going to be introduced to? Boaz, okay? And Boaz becomes a really critical figure in this. And we're going to move from Ruth's choice in chapter 1, right? She chooses to follow Yahweh. She chooses to serve Naomi, to Ruth's service. And that you're going to see very clearly how devoted she is to her mother-in-law. And then we go from there and we see that both Ruth and Naomi are poverty-stricken, and that God is going to use a very unlikely source in their mind to move them out of poverty. And then we have Ruth's devotion to Naomi. Very clearly, you'll see that throughout the pages of the book of Ruth, but specifically in chapter 2. And that Ruth is going to show us her care for her mother-in-law in very significant ways. And then we're going to see that there's going to be a significant change in Naomi's attitude. Do you remember in chapter 1 when they return back to Bethlehem? She says, and they say, oh, is that Naomi? What does she say? Don't call me Naomi. What does Naomi mean? Pleasantness. I have not pleasant. God has not given me a pleasant life. Call me Mara, because my life has been bitter. And so we're going to see, though, in this chapter, there's going to be a change. And Naomi's going to go from Mara to what? To Naomi. And so it's a beautiful transition that's going to take place here. And then finally, we're going to be in the fields of Bethlehem, and we'll see that later in a picture here. And so as we look in chapter 2, we're going to see Ruth's grace towards Naomi, okay, that she is very gracious towards her mother-in-law and how she wants to serve her. We're going to see God's grace towards Ruth, because God is going to providentially bring Boaz into her life. And then we're going to see Boaz's grace towards Ruth. And so if you've noticed there, that's grace, and what? Grace. And so grace is a major theme within this chapter, but also within the book itself. And then we're going to see that with Ruth's commitment to care to her mother-in-law, it's not based on externals, right? Because when she puts her faith in Yahweh, what did Naomi have to offer her? Nothing. Absolutely 100% nothing. So when she comes to faith out of poverty. And I think it was Peter said that when we come, we need to come really, in a sense, like Naomi, broken, poor, and the same with Ruth. And so as we're thinking about this, we want to continue to make the ties to the gospel and who Jesus is and what he's doing. And so in that, her commitment doesn't look for what she's going to get out of it. Her commitment is simply based on the fact that there's a need, and I'm committed and loyal to that person to meet that need. And so that's another good lesson for all of us, is that Ruth is simply devoted to hard work, with not looking for anything personally in return. And then we're going to find that Boaz, in this part of the story, is going to just embody grace. And we'll see it over and over, and it's very instructive to us. As we interact with others, we should be marked by grace. And finally, we're going to see that Naomi finally gets a spark of hope, because we left her in the last chapter really a dejected woman, and just very sad about the circumstances of life. And maybe some of us in here are looking at our life circumstances and saying, I feel like I've been given a bad hand. And the reality is there are no bad hands. In the providence of God, the hand we have is the best hand we could possibly have for what God wants to do in and through us. And if you think about Naomi, I want you to watch, because her conclusion after chapter 1 is, got a really bad hand, right? But you're going to see as we work through 2, and then 3, and then 4, that when she looks back, she can recognize, you know what? That bad hand was the best thing that ever happened to me. All right? And so I want you to have hope that if you feel like you've been dealt a bad hand, that at some point you're going to be able to look back at it and say, you know what? That was the best thing that could possibly have happened. And part of the problem for us is we don't have all the information, right? We just have this little narrow window of information. And we then shake our fist at God and say, why me? How could you possibly do that? Do you not understand how difficult this is? And what's he sitting up there thinking, oh man, you are so right. This one totally caught me by surprise. I mean, somehow you just weren't in the equation. No way. He orchestrated and designed, or at very least, allowed that to take place for his greater glory and for your greater good, or my greater good. And that's really important. Those are never separable. God never works off of his glory at our expense. It's always his glory and our good. Two sides of the same coin. Then, when we got back last week, my wife was saying, Carl, I'm not sure you really nailed it on the area of sin. I mean, she says you do sin really well, but I'm not sure you explained it really well. So I want to take a minute to make sure that we're really clear on the issue of sin as expressed in the book, because we saw with Elimelech that he makes what kind of a choice? He makes a very poor choice. He makes a pragmatic choice. He leaves Bethlehem, which is the house of bread, And he goes to basically the enemy of God in Moab, and he chooses to find his security outside of God and outside of the land. And what happens to him? He dies. And he dies because of his sin. Does that mean anytime one of us is out of the will of God, that we will die? Eventually we'll die because of the effects of sin. But God deals with all the sins very differently. So I want to make sure that we're really clear on that. So when we look at Elimelech, he rejected God, he rejected and looked for security outside of God. And we want to be careful that we're not doing that, right? Because we can very easily do that. We can find our security in our health or in our finances or in something else, in a relationship. And then we see that Naomi, is she guilty of any kind of sin in that first chapter? She is. And what was the sin? When Elimelech died, what should she immediately have done? She should have gone back, right? She should have said, you know what? I've dutifully followed my husband. It was a mistake, but I went and I did what I was supposed to do. But now I've got to protect my boys, because my boys are eventually going to get to the age where they're going to what? Marry. And they're not supposed to marry whom? Moabites or Gentiles. Not because there's some racial issue, but because there's a theological issue, and that God doesn't want their hearts to be bound to those who aren't believers in Yahweh. And so she should have done that as a protective element. She doesn't, so they then marry who? Moabite women. Or Moabite women. Okay, that one's wrong. I'm sorry. Yeah, they do marry Moabite women. Right? And so the names of the two sons are what? Mahalon and Chilion, right? And so what does that mean? Sick and sicker. Yeah, dumb and dumber. Sick and sicker. Right? Sick and weak, basically. And that they were outside of the land. They were outside of God in a relationship with God. And therefore, they demonstrate what it looks like that you are sick, spiritually sick, and that you are weak, you have no spiritual strength. And what happens to them? They die, okay? And so their deaths are very much a consequence of their actions. But when we look at sin in general, there are some other things I want to make sure we're clear on. Sin always has what? Consequences. And again, we can choose the sin, but what can we not choose? The consequences. That is completely out of our realm of responsibility. God chooses those and how he wants it. So therefore, for these individuals, God chose death. And again, they're a mirror of the nation. They're a microcosm of what was going on in the book of Judges with the nation of Israel. Because that's the first one. The second one is that not all sins are the same. Right? And so we can say, is it worse to lust or to do adultery? Well, you're thinking, well, wait a minute. Jesus said if you lust, what? You've committed adultery in your heart. Now, what he is saying there is he's speaking to the Pharisees who are trying to say, hey, I can have all the lust in my heart I want, but I won't do adultery. And Jesus is saying, your umbrella is far too narrow. So I'm going to broaden the umbrella, but there are degrees of sin, okay? And that lust, though it's sinful, is not nearly as bad as adultery, okay? And so that's the second thing, is that not all sins are the same. 3 is not all sins have the same consequences, right? So 2 of us can do the exact same thing, and, somebody may get in the car and they're drunk and they drive and they get home and they bump into a tree and now they dented their car. The other person does a head-on collision and dies and kills somebody else in another car. Very different consequences, the exact same sin. Okay, and so not all sins have the same consequences. And then 4, we looked at Elimelech. 5, we looked at the fact that Elimelech's sin also mirrors what was going on in the nation, and we said the same with Mahalon and Chilion. Okay, and again, not all sin results in immediate death, even though when we look in the book of Acts, who dies right after their sin? Who's that? Yeah, Ananias and Sapphira. Why? Yeah, they lied to the Holy Spirit. Have you ever lied to the Holy Spirit? I bet you have. I bet you I have. Okay? But the reality is, it's very early in the church, and when they die, what happens to the members of the church? They are all what? Very fearful. God wanted the church to learn early that there are very severe consequences to sin. And so that helps us to understand the nature of sin. Another thing I want us to look at is the source and role of suffering in Naomi's life. because she definitely has suffered a lot. I mean, if you think of her life, what has she suffered? I'm sorry, what did you say? Okay, married to an idiot. I might not go that far because I think all of our wives could probably conclude if we're married or they're married to that we've all acted like idiots, right? I mean, it's part of maybe being an XY chromosome, I don't know. And so the reality, though, is he makes a very foolish decision, and that has consequences to her. So he dies, so she suffers the loss of her husband. She makes, I think, an equally foolish decision, but in a different direction, which then her children, her two boys, then marry Moabite women, and then she suffers again the loss of what? Her two sons, okay? And then what? When they left, think about this, when they left Bethlehem, what did they leave behind? They left family. What else? Friends. What else? What? Land. Okay, this is a huge one, land. They either had to sell and liquidate and get the money so they could go to Moab, but they lost the rights to their land. So she lost her husband, which means they lost their name. They have no land. This is a big no-no in Jewish culture. And so she has lost all of that. And then she comes back, and she's a very humbled woman because she is poverty-stricken. You have to realize that. She is, at best, can live at subsistence level. So when they come back into Israel, they're not coming with loads of cash. They're coming as broken people who have no money. Okay? And as a result, she then, when she comes, she is a beaten down woman who is very poor. And so when the other women that knew her, when they see her, their reaction is what? Oh my gosh, is that Naomi? Is that, I cannot believe that that's Naomi, because she has just really not weathered the suffering well. So we see that God has something beautiful within that. And she has to go through that for some very tangible good things that are going to happen. And so what are the good things that happen from Naomi's suffering? Yeah, first of all, she goes back to Bethlehem, right? Okay, the providence of God is going to bring her back to her home. Second is that it's going to help you to understand the nature of Ruth's faith. That Ruth comes to faith because of this whole situation, right? But she makes a decision to follow Yahweh and to embrace Naomi at the same time. Also, we begin to see that Ruth is going to become a source of security when they're back in the land of Bethlehem, because she's the one who's going to go out and do the gleaning. And so that helps you to begin to see the heart that Ruth has and the love she has for her mother-in-law. Ruth then meets who? Boaz. Right? Okay? Craig's going like this. Yeah, I mean, okay. Now, you got to understand, though, Boaz is more likely the age of Naomi. He is not the age of Ruth, okay? But she does meet Boaz. Then Boaz hears about the type of woman that Ruth is, and as a result, he rewards her by allowing her to glean and to have a job long term and to provide grain for them, okay? And then later, Boaz is going to accept responsibility as the what? As the kinsman redeemer. And so as a result, the name is going to come back. The land is going to come back. I mean, there's your huge thing. The shame that she felt from all of that, gone. Okay? And then after that, we're going to find that she's going to have a little what? She's going to have a little baby, Obed. She's not going to have the baby, but it looks like that in the story, right? And so, was her suffering worth it? Absolutely. When she's on this side of the suffering and she looks back, she can see that it was worth it. Does God always give us that vantage point? No. But is the same reality true? Yes. Okay, and so God promises Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation. When Abraham died, did he see a great nation before him? Absolutely not, right? And so we don't always get to see the fruit of the suffering, but the suffering always will bear fruit, and it's always going to bring God glory, and it's always for our good, though we may not get to experience that aspect of it, all right? And that's where the element of faith comes in. So in the end, her suffering results in salvation for Ruth, marriage, retention of the land, return of her husband's name, and the joy of a grandchild. So I think it was worth it, in hindsight. Because had that not happened, would any of us be here? No. I mean, that's crazy, right? But none of us would be here. And so we're thankful that she was able to endure the suffering, go from Naomi to Mara, return to Naomi, and we're all the beneficiaries of that. God uses suffering in our own lives for very special things. He matures us. He makes us more like Christ. And why is that important? That he wants to make us like Christ. If people see Christ in us, how is that helpful? Yeah, we're going to reflect Christ to them, and they're going to understand and see the gospel before their very eyes. So God has an evangelistic purpose in our suffering. And so he also used it to show his power, that our faith is real. Because if you're not having your faith tested, how do people know if your faith is real? And so God does that. So that's the issue of suffering. And with that, we'll now enter to chapter 2. So I'm going to read this, and hopefully we can make it all the way through. I've got my clock here, so I'm going to have to do some serious. I didn't think it was going to take that long. All right. We're going to read the first verse. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So the author immediately slips in a new character by the name of Boaz, okay? And so we're going to see that Boaz is going to have a very important role, but the author wants us to understand, get ready, Boaz is coming. So when you think about Boaz, what are some questions you might have in your mind now that we've thrown him into the mix? Who is Boaz? Why is he in the story? Could Ruth possibly have a relationship with this guy? What's he going to do, right? And so it very clear, it says, now Naomi had a what? A kinsman. What is a kinsman? A kinsman is a male relative who would act on behalf of another who's in need. Who fits that bill? No, Naomi, right? Naomi, because Elimelech, because it tells us right here, right? Of the family. So Boaz is of the family of who? Elimelech. Okay, and so we have this contrast between Elimelech, who led his family into sin, and Boaz, who's going to lead the family out of sin. All right, so you have this constant contrast in this book, which are very interesting. But because of that relationship with Elimelech, he then becomes a kinsman, that he can relieve the suffering, actually, that Naomi is enduring at this time. So it says, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, so we're referring to Elimelech, and a man of what? Great wealth. So he has the means, okay? So he's a kinsman, and he has the means to do something about their plight. So my question is he going to do it? Okay? And so we'll find out. And then his name is Boaz, which means strength. And we said, if you looked at whether it was the tabernacle or the temple, they had two main pillars. One of them was Boaz, okay? And that he will make sure that there means strength, okay? And he's going to show his strength of character as we go through the story. Then we're going to go look at the next section, which is verses 2 through 3. And let me read those. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I might find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. And so she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she just happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. And so when we see this, it says, and Ruth the what? Moabitess. Okay, why does the author bring that in? What's the relationship of the Moabites? Do you remember again? I want to make sure we're really clear on this. They're the enemy of the people of Israel. They blocked their coming in. Balak prayed against them. He wanted a curse from Balaam against the nation of Israel. And so she is from a cursed people. Okay? And so in your mind as the reader, you're thinking, she's in serious trouble, okay? And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please what? Let me go and glean. Okay, now we don't do gleaning here. What is gleaning? Yeah, it's picking up the leftovers, okay? That's a good way of putting it. Let me read from Leviticus 19:9, and it says, or 9 and 10, it says, now, when you reap, and so this is Moses and God's establishing the laws that are going to mark the nation of Israel so that they demonstrate the gracious nature of God. And God, this is God's welfare system for all the peoples, both Jew and non-Jew alike. And he says this, now when you reap the harvests of our land, you shall not reap to the very corners of the field, nor shall you gather the gleaning from your harvest. Meaning that leave stuff for the poor. Let the poor come in, and they will have to then go and work and pick up the stuff off the ground or from the stalks that are left behind. And then in verse 10 it says, nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor gather the fallen fruit of the vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God. So, who's the needy and the stranger in this story right now? Ruth. So, by Levitical law, they are required to make sure that she can do this. Okay? But they can allow her to do this, but make her miserable in the process. Right? Which, think about it. I mean, as we see, we're going to see that that is a very, very real thing that can happen. So it says that you may glean, okay? And so this is so that they can just get a subsistence and have something to eat. Because they're coming in and they have no family, they have nothing, okay? And so this is what they're going to be eating that day. It would be like akin to you all of a sudden having to turn to collecting aluminum cans. And you got to go to Fred Meyer, and you got to go get the bag, and you don't have any money to get the bag, and then you got to turn it in, and then you got to wait for them to give you the money, okay? And so this is what's going to happen. But Ruth is the one who makes the choice, right? She approaches Naomi. What does she not do that she could have done? She could have said, hey, Naomi, let's go do this together. All right, but she doesn't do that. She respects Naomi, and she respects the age difference, and she says, I am going to do this, okay? What does she also not do? She doesn't sit on her duff and just wait for the system to take care of her. God didn't design it like that. This is a work fair. You work, you eat. I'll make sure you have something to find so you can eat, but you're the one who's going to have to go out and get that. And so as we look at the way the social structure is set up, God has made it so that people maintain dignity. Because in their work, they find dignity. And in the provision, they'll find from God. And so this is a really important part of the story, is that she is then going to glean on behalf of Naomi among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I might find favor. So when she goes out, she already knows that she is not going to be well received because she's a Moabite. It's in a very small town, and so everybody knows who she is, okay? Or at least has heard something about her. But she goes, and what's her prayer as she walks out the door? That I might find what? Favor, grace. Okay, that's what favor means here, is grace. That somehow, God, I am expecting that when I go to this field, that you will somehow provide. Now, when she goes to the field, as a gleaner, how does everybody else look at her? Very condescending. She is as low as you can get in society. You cannot get any lower, okay? They know she's poor, she's a woman, and she's by herself. And what? And a Moabite, okay? And so you put all those into the equation, and for her to make this step of faith is exactly what it was, is a step of faith. And as a result, it goes on and it says, and she said, Naomi then says what? Go. Now, why would Naomi say that? Because she's what? She's desperate. She is in need. I need food. Please go, okay? Then in verse 3, so she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. So you've got the field, the reapers go through, and as they go through, you then follow, and anything that's left over you get to keep. Okay, and so it's barley harvest time, and so she's getting all the little barley grains, and she's just collecting those, okay? And then it goes on, it says, and she happened What does that mean? What's the author saying there? It's by what? It's by chance. I mean, it appears, right? And it happened, or she happened to come to the field belonging to whom? Oh my gosh, she went to the field where Boaz was. Did she know that was Boaz's field? No. She had no idea. It wasn't like Naomi said, I got this all figured out. You go to that field and we're good to go. She said, just go. I'm a depressed woman. Please get us something to eat. And so she goes and she comes to the field of Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. In case you missed it the first time, he's of the family of who? Elimelech, which means he is the kinsman, which means all of a sudden there could be a change in her fortunes. I mean, this is incredible what's going on right here, okay? And she doesn't know it at this point. She's just doing what she said she would do. And so the reapers are going through, and she is just following them. And it says, who is of the family of Elimelech? And then in verse 4, so let me read the next section. It's starting in verse 4. Let me change the slides. I've got to be a good boy. There we go. And we're going to look at 4 through 13. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, may the Lord be with you. And they said to him, may the Lord bless you. And then Boaz said to the servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose woman is this? And the servant in charge of the reapers replied, she is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. And she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. And thus she came and remained from the morning until now, and she has been sitting in the house for a little while. Okay, so now we get this picture of what she did when she arrives, right? So Boaz comes on the scene. He's coming from Bethlehem, and he sees somebody who he doesn't recognize. And so he asks the person in charge, whose woman is this, right? So what does that tell you about Boaz already? Yeah, he's very observant, right? He knows his people, and he's aware of what's going on his land, all right? And so the servant then says, the one in charge, that she has made a request. And that request is that she wants to be able to do what? To glean. Okay, so in Boaz's mind, you got Boaz the boss, you got the reapers, right? So we're looking in the pecking order here. And then the who? The gleaners. So Boaz, the boss, knows she's a gleaner. So how could he be viewing her? Well, if the reapers are condescending toward her, Boaz could be even more so, right? Because he's the boss. And so we're going to see how he then responds to her. And then Boaz said to his servant in charge, whose young lady is this? And the servant in verse 6 says, she is the young Moabite woman who was returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. And so he describes her as, again, what? A Moabite woman. And so, again, in your mind, the author wants us to continue to see this is not a favorable woman. She is not going to receive favorable treatment. She's going to get what she deserves, is what we'd be thinking, okay? And so the reality then becomes, does she get what she deserves? No. And that's a picture of what? Grace, okay? And that's where grace comes in so strongly in this story. And so it goes on and it says in verse 7, and she said, please let me glean and gather among the reapers. Okay, so she must have known the gleaning law. And how did she know the gleaning law? From whom? Had to be Naomi. And so one of the things that for Gwen and I, as we did missions, is you're always looking at what we call a cultural insider. Somebody can help you decipher what's happening. And so she knew about this gleaning law because Naomi had taught her what it was. And so she's simply going to then use that gleaning law for their advantage. And then it goes on and it says, thus, she came and remained from morning until now. Okay? And so when we see that, what does that tell us about Ruth? She's a hard worker, right? She got up at sunrise. She approached the people from a different culture, knowing they're going to react very negatively towards her. And she humbled herself, and she said, do you have something? Because she had prayed, what? I want to find favor. So she will have to act on that. You can't assume that you're going to get favor and just sit there and wait. But she actually engages, all right? And she remains from morning until now, And then where does she happen to be at this point when he's talking? She's in the shade. So they have this little thing that you can get out of the sun. Okay, we're in March. It's probably in the mid-60s at this point. But she's still in the sun all day, and she's been working all morning, and she's taking a break. She happened to take a break when? When Boaz shows up. You think, right? So then we come to verse 8. And it says this, and we're going to do we're still in the same section. And Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to do what? To touch you." Now, why would he have to say that? Because they want to do what? They want to mistreat her, okay? And when you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. And then she fell on her face, and bowing to the ground, she said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" And Boaz replied to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of her husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother of your birth and came to the people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work, and the wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge." And she said, "I have found favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me, indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants." Okay, so there's a lot here. And so we'll try to just work our way through. Then Boaz said to Ruth, what? Listen carefully. Okay, he knows the dynamic of the reapers and how they deal with other people, and especially a Moabite woman, how they're going to deal with her. So he says, listen very carefully. Do not glean in another field. Meaning what? Stay here. You don't have to go anywhere else. What you need, you will find here. I'm going to make sure I'm protecting you. Okay, he doesn't say that, but that's what he's doing. And then it goes on, and it says, furthermore, do not go from this one, but stay here with my what? My maids. Okay, there's strength in numbers, and you're going to be safe if you're embedded in with these other women. Nothing's going to happen to you, okay? So he's really watching out for her interest. And then let your eyes be on the field, which they what? They reap, okay? So they're the reapers, and as they go, you just follow right in their wake, and you just start picking up everything, okay? And go after them, all right? So you just follow them, but he's making sure you follow really closely. You don't go glean somewhere else where they've already picked through, but as they're picking, you're going to be going with them. And then it goes on and it says, indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. So there's definitely a safety issue that's going on, and he's making sure that she is going to be safe and cared for. And when you are thirsty, do what? You don't have to draw water. Normal gleaners, you got to go find your own water. This is on you. But what does he say to her? We've already got the water drawn. You just go to that water and you drink whenever you want, whenever you're thirsty, you go. Is that gracious or what? Yeah, she's totally undeserving. Right? She's at the bottom of the heap. She's a Moabite. But he is watching out and protecting her. And then it goes on in verse 10. And then she fell on her face, but she recognizes what in the world's going on here, right? Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, what? Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me? And what's the obvious answer? What did she pray for when she walked out the door? May I find favor. God answered her by giving her favor, okay? But she, in a spirit of humility, and I didn't hear Jonathan's message, but it sounds like it was on this part of this issue, is she comes with a heart of humility. And you know if you're humble when you receive something, if you're what? Thankful. Regardless of what it is. It can be something that you think, that's not too cool. But you are what? When somebody gives it to you, you say, man, thank you so much. I am so thankful. That's a spirit of humility. A spirit of pride says, that's below me. Why would you give me something so cheap? That's so not me. Okay? But she doesn't do that. She prostrates herself. She says, she falls to the ground and says to him, I have found favor. What is she doing? She's gleaning. She's in the dirt picking up these little pieces of grain. And she is thanking him profusely for that and that she can drink water. And it goes on, and she then gives you the reason. And she says, since I am what? A foreigner. She knew she just was out of place and that she shouldn't receive grace. In verse 11, and Boaz replied to her, all that you have done with your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been reported to me. What is that saying? What's that? A good reputation. Yeah, she has a good reputation. Her reputation has far preceded her. Okay? And that you never, our reputation should do what? It should precede us. So when we meet people, they're like, oh, dude, I totally know who you are. You are a godly guy, or you're a godly gal. And I really appreciate that you've done this. Okay? And so she finds favor in Boaz's eyes because Boaz recognizes the excellent woman that she is. This is the Proverbs 31 woman. Okay? And so uses the same terminology. And that she is caring for her mother-in-law. And so he goes on to say that. How you left your what? Your father and your mother in the land of your birth. You left security. You left everything that would have given you meaning and security in life. Okay? And you did what? And you came to a people that you did not previously know. Okay, if you've ever gone to another country and they have different customs and they're different people and maybe have a different language, man, it is a rough go, especially those early moments. And so he recognizes and acknowledges what she's going through. And then he says, may the Lord, what? Reward you. What he's doing is he's giving her a blessing. Do you see the irony here? She's a what? She's a Moabite, which is a cursed woman. And he's giving her a blessing. See, we have people that come into our lives and they treat us very poorly. And what do? We curse them. Maybe we actually curse them with our words, right? And he's telling us, you don't curse that person, you do what? You bless that person, all right? You bring benefit to that person. And so he says, may the Lord reward your what? Work. This is a hard-working woman. And he sees that. And the wages be full from the Lord. Now, he's the one who's opened up his land. Does he take any credit for this? No. It's all on the Lord because he is obligated by law to do this. Okay? And he's simply being obedient to what God has said. And so he recognizes that. And so he's asking that the Lord would bless her. The God of Israel, okay? This is Jehovah Jireh. This is the specific God from the land of Israel that she is under. And it says, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. Now, this is a term, and it's used all over the scriptures. It's very interesting. It means protection. So that it's God who is protecting her. It's God who led her, right? It just happened to come to this field. It was God who did that. And so he's acknowledging that. And then it goes on and says, then she said, I have found favor in your sight, my Lord. Okay, what is she again expressing here? What kind of a heart? A heart of gratitude, a humble heart. A humble heart will always have a heart of gratitude. See, when we get angry with God and we don't have a heart of gratitude, that's because we have put ourselves in whose place? In God's place. And we're like, you got it wrong. If you really understood it from my perspective, God, you would never have done this. Okay, do you see the arrogance in that? But the reality is, we don't have all the facts or counterfactuals or everything, but God does, and so that's where we then need to trust. So as I have found favor in my sight, my Lord, for you have done what to me? Comforted me, and indeed spoken kindly. And what did Boaz reward his workers? Don't do what? Don't abuse her, and we're going to see in a bit, don't insult her. No Moabite jokes. right? Okay, and he speaks what? Kindly. He doesn't abuse her. He doesn't take advantage of her. He actually showers her with grace. He gives her tremendous freedom in the gleaning aspect, in the water aspect. So it's just a beautiful picture of what grace does. The grace isn't stingy, but it's bountiful. And what's that? He showed honor. Yeah, and he honors this cursed woman, and he blesses her. Okay? And then it goes on and it says, spoke kindly to your maidservant. This is Ruth speaking. Though I am not like one of your maidservants. Meaning the maidservants were Jewish, and they were of his people, and therefore they should be treated well. I'm not, but you've treated me well. Okay? Then we get to verse 14. Wow. And it says this, and at mealtime. So now we're in the mealtime. Are we still on this one? No, we're in the next slide. Now I love this picture. If you get the notes, I put a link here that I would encourage you. They've got some pretty cool pictures that sort of capture more what it would have been like. So verse 14, at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. And so she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. And then she arose to glean, and Boaz commanded his servant, saying, let her glean among the sheaves, and do not insult her. Also, you shall purposely pull out some of the grain in the bundles and leave it so that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. All right? And so again, when we see here, it's now mealtime. Where did the reapers get to eat? They get to eat together, and Boaz, as the boss, is going to provide them with a meal. Where do the gleaners get to eat? They get to eat whatever they gleaned. It's uncooked. It's unprepared. But that's what they get. But that's not what happens here. At mealtime, Boaz says to her, this foreign woman who feels very much an outsider, says what? Yes, come here. Join us that you may what? That you may eat bread with us. The bread is what kind of grain? It's prepared grain. That means it's been ground, it's been whatever you do to make it into bread and then cooked, right? All those things have happened versus eating the raw grain. Do you see the grace? Okay, and it goes on. And not only that, then he says, and you get to dip it in what? Vinegar. Now, you're thinking, culturally, we're thinking, oh, that doesn't sound so good, right? But this was a what do you call that? But it was a delicacy for them. It was a very special thing that they got to do. So here's this outsider who now is made a what? An insider. And he provides her with food and with the vinegar. And so he's treating her really, really well.
Carl?
Yes.
Right in the middle of 14.
Yes.
She sat beside the reapers, and he, Boaz,
Yes.
served her.
That's an excellent point.
Attitude, right?
Yeah. Yeah, did you hear that? So I want to make sure the people on film, Larry brings up the point that not only was she being cared for that way, but he as the boss was the one actually doing the serving and making sure that she was cared for. So that's an excellent point. Thank you. And so she sat beside the reapers. I mean, just think how she would have felt. A little special but uncomfortable, right? It's like this weird kind of deal. And she served her roasted grain. Now, what's the roasted grain all about? It's just sort of like it's going to be energy food, so when she's out in the field, she can just have it, right? And so then she ate and was satisfied and had some what? Had some left over. And now the question is, what is she going to do with the leftovers? Yeah, she's going to do a doggy bag, right? So she's going to take it and she's going to bring it home. We're going to see that later if we have time, but we won't. Okay. And then it says, and then verse 15, when she arose to glean, Boaz commanded, he didn't suggest, he commanded his servant, saying, let her glean among the sheaves and do not what? Insult her. Do not insult her. Meaning what? What would they naturally have done? Insulted her. I'm sure they have a whole list of Moabite jokes, honestly. Okay? And that they're like, show some self-restraint here and don't pull those out. Yes. Okay. Verse 16. Also, you shall purposely pull out some of the grain from the bundles and leave it that she may glean. So now what is he saying? Your work that you have done that are in these, you can see those the thing laying on its side there, the sheaves. I want you to pull some of that out. And I want you to just put it right there. That's full of grain. That's not picking up the little individual pieces, right? And so again, he's just showering this grace upon her. And leave it there, and then do what? Don't rebuke her. Don't make her feel bad. Like, what are you doing taking that? That's not for you. Right? No, that's there. And he just has to keep warning these employees. Hey, don't do this, but care for her. Then verse 17. Wow. Okay, we'll see what we can do. And so she gleaned in the field until evening. And then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city. Sorry, I've got to go to the next slide. I'm really trying to be a good boy. And so she gleaned in the field until evening. She beats it out for what she gleaned. And it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it and went to the city. And her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And so she took it out and gave to Naomi what was left when she was satisfied. So now we get this picture, right? She's done with all the gleaning, but now she has more work. What's her work? She's got to still get these sheaves that were there and get the grain out of that. And when she's all done, she has about an ephah of barley, which is about 30 or 40 pounds, depending on what you look at. She's going to bring all that home. That is a huge, you don't get that in a day's work. Okay? So it's just a super abundance that God has provided her because he has found what? Favor. Okay? So then Naomi, metaphorically speaking, she's looking out the window. And she sees her coming with this big old bag. You see that bag? And she's trudging down the road. And what's Naomi thinking? Naomi's from Bethlehem. She's gone through a lot of these cycles before. So this is not new to her. And what does she see? I mean, her eyes could just be popping out of her head, right? And so, so Naomi then puts this barley in front of her and says, oh, by the way, at lunch, I have some left over of the roasted. Because what do you think she was eating all day? Maybe nothing. We don't know. But she certainly didn't have anything. And so it was very thoughtful of Ruth to then say, hey, I've got some roasted grain, meaning it's already prepared. Eat, enjoy. Okay? She doesn't make her feel bad about the fact that she's been out all day. All right, then it goes on. And her mother-in-law said, I'm just going to touch on this, and then we're going to jump into the thing. I'll have to go back here. But when you read this part of the story, you have to do it with a Jewish accent. And you have to be a Jewish woman. Naomi, you met a boy? Tell me about this boy. Okay? So when you read it, please read it like that because it will just bring it to life. Go watch Fiddler on the Roof, get yourself, saturated, and then read this. And her mother-in-law said, where have you gleaned today and where did you work? And may he take notice of you who is blessed. So she says, look, I have no idea where you worked, but whoever gave you this superabundance, I want that person to be blessed. Okay? But she recognizes, again, she's from this part of the town. And so she said to her mother-in-law, whom she worked, and said, the man of the name whose field I worked at today is what? Boaz. Now, if you're Naomi and you hear that name, what immediately happens? Ooh, jackpot! Right? Boaz. Boaz. Now, we don't get all that here, but that's the emotion that had to have hit her. Because later she's going to say that, this Boaz, he's a kinsman he's a kinsman of ours. Meaning what? We may not be poor much longer, but we have to play our cards right. Okay, so none of that's being said, but we're going to get there, but we don't have time today. So I'm going to have you read this, and then we'll go back to this later, but I do want to end on the principles for us today so that you have something to go home with. All right? So and when you come back, please have your best Jewish female voice. Okay, principles from Ruth 2. I'm sorry that we didn't finish. A little bit too much in the front end. But we'll finish 2 next time, and then we'll continue on in 3, chapter 3. All right, first is the principles we can gain from Ruth is work hard on behalf of others. All right? There should be no, just because you're more seasoned, doesn't mean you need to be more idle. Right? But be working really hard on behalf of others. Think through, how can I be working on behalf of others and caring for them? Okay? Grace begets grace. Do you see what that means? That if I can tell if you understand the grace of God by how you treat me when I mistreat you. If I mistreat you and you treat me poorly back, what does that help me understand about your understanding of God's grace? You have a really poor understanding of it. But when we've received God's grace, right, then we are very gracious towards those who mistreat us. Because we recognize, oh my word, I am totally unworthy. The mistake you made towards me, hey, I've made that 100,000 times towards others. I take you in, I welcome you. This is what Boaz does to Ruth, right? And so that's grace begets grace. And so look at your life and say, is it marked by grace? When other people treat me poorly, am I gracious toward them? If not, then go back and revisit how gracious God has been towards you. You reap what you sow, and the pun is intended here, right? If you sow sparingly into the lives of people, when the time comes for you and you're in need, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be alone. Okay, but if you're giving your life away, the chances are when you're in need, God will provide through another person and care for you. And we didn't get to this, but this will be in verse 20, is act towards others with hesed love. And so I'll hold off on that to describe that next week. But hesed is a beautiful word in the scriptures that appears like 250 times. I've been studying it for 6 months and I still haven't finished. But it's a very cool word. So we'll look at that next week. And then finally, humility breeds thankfulness. If you are in a time or a season of suffering and you do not have a thankful heart, that probably is an indicator that you're struggling with humility. Because God gets to be God and you don't. But the problem is when we're not humble and we're not thankful, then we take the place of God and we get really angry and we get really bitter. Yes?
Well, and Boaz kind of reflects Jesus' servant love, the way he served this woman. He was in an exalted position and he humbled himself to serve her.
Absolutely, yeah. So what Peter was saying is that Boaz really serves as a picture of Christ, right? That he gave bountifully and graciously and lovingly towards somebody who was completely undeserving. And so he's a beautiful picture of what Jesus does on our behalf. And like the woman at the well. So let me close, and then next week again we'll pick up on chapter 2, and we'll be moving a little bit quicker. Father, thank you for your goodness, and we thank you for just the grace. I mean, what great people. Boaz and Ruth. And Father, we're going to see the change in Naomi's heart as she sees just your graciousness. And when we experience your grace, it's got to be transformative. And we see that. And we'll see that even more fully next week when we look at Naomi. Father, help us to be a people marked by grace. That we've experienced your grace. May we be gracious towards others. Father, that you have forgiven us much. And may we be willing to forgive those who maybe bring something against us. And Father, may we never take the place of God, shaking our fist at you because we somehow think that you have missed and that we're suffering because of that. But Father, that you have designed those things and allowed those things so that we can be dependent upon you and reflect Christ to others. So we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.